I wish I could say I anticipated it, that I saw the warning signs and was wise enough to avoid the catastrophe that was Sophia before it ever had an impact on my life. But I didn't. I entered that marriage naively, certain that I was making the greatest choice of my life. And perhaps that's the true tragedy, not the betrayal, nor the legal dispute, nor the arrogant boyfriend, but the fact that I once honestly thought I had it all. It wasn't one of those whirlwind romances where you fall head over heels right away. When Sophia and I first met 7 years ago, our connection was gradual, stable, and dependable. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and when I proposed, I did it with my entire heart, without hesitation. At the time, I had no reservations about her at all. She was the kind of lovely, lively woman who made conversation flow naturally. My parents adored her. My mother, Linda, cherished the fact that Sophia was charming enough to win people over in a matter of minutes. My father, Paul, who always loved a good chat over coffee, was grateful that she could sit through a football game and feign interest. That should have been my first clue. She was too skilled at playing a part, too good at winning people over. The only person who wasn't entirely fooled was my sister, Claire. She was doubtful from the start, not in a loud, intrusive way, but with subtle remarks that I chose to ignore. She likes good things, Claire once said. The way she talks about money and her life goals, it's not about building something together. It's about getting what she believes she's entitled to. I laughed it off because I liked Sophia. And love, I told myself, changes people. Before we were married, Sophia worked part-time at a boutique. It was more of a joke job, something she did for extra spending money. But after the wedding, that job vanished. She said she needed time to figure herself out, whatever that meant. At first, I was okay with it. I had a good job. I wasn't making millions in real estate, but I lived comfortably. Before we got married, I had already purchased a small yet lovely house, with my father co-signing the loan to help with interest rates. But I made every single payment. At the time, I didn't think of it as just mine or hers. It was ours. For the first few months, everything seemed normal. Sophia played the role of a devoted wife. She cooked wonderfully, occasionally did laundry, though she preferred takeout and frequently grumbled about how exhausting it all was. She pretended to contribute, but in reality, she was simply living in a house I had bought and being supported by me. I ignored the small red flags, the way she constantly talked about wanting a bigger house, a better car, a trip to Europe. Whenever I pointed out that I was the only one working and we couldn't afford those things, she got irritated. When I suggested she go back to work, she scoffed. "I'm not going to take just any job, Nathan," she would say. "I want to find something that makes me happy." Months turned into years. 2 years passed, and she never found this so-called fulfilling career. I told myself it was just a phase, that she simply needed time. After all, a good husband supports his wife and believes in her, right? But there was always that little voice whispering in the back of my mind. She's not looking for a job. She just wants an easy life. Gradually, things changed. She began going out more often. At first, just for lunches. Then shopping trips turned into late-night outings. When I asked about it, she snapped. "I just need space. You're acting like I have to be attached to you all the time." Was it really wrong for me to wonder why my wife suddenly needed so much space? Claire was the first to notice. "Nathan, are you sure everything is okay?" I lied. "Yeah, everything's fine." She studied me carefully. "She seems different, like she's already checked out of this marriage." I brushed it off because I didn't want to admit she might be right. The first real gut punch came one night when Sophia came home at 2 a.m. I was waiting in the living room. Not angry, not accusing, just waiting. "Where were you?" I asked. She froze. Just for a split second. Long enough for me to catch a glimpse of the truth flashing across her face. Then she snapped. "Are you seriously waiting up for me? Why can't I have a life outside this house? You're so suffocatingly paranoid, Nathan." She stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door. I just sat there, staring at the empty space where she had been standing. Something changed that night. I had been sleepwalking through my own marriage, but now I was awake. And yet, the next morning, she kissed my cheek as if nothing had happened. No apology. No explanation. She made coffee, scrolled through her phone, like she hadn't gaslit me into doubting my own sanity just hours before. And I let it go. That was my biggest mistake. Not finding the texts. Not the fight over divorce. Not the judge's final ruling. No, the real devastation started when I lost faith in myself. Because once you lose that, you've already lost everything. For months, I watched as Sophia grew more distant, treating me like an inconvenience rather than a husband. Late lunches turned into late-night outings, which turned into overnight disappearances. She always had an excuse. I had too much to drink and crashed at Hannah's. It was just a girls' night. Nothing serious. I ignored it. Because when you trust someone, that's what you do, right? But then one night, she didn't come home. No call. No text. Nothing. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise. When the door finally creaked open, I got up and walked into the living room. She stood there, hair disheveled, makeup smudged, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. "Where were you?" I asked. She kicked off her heels without even looking at me. "Nathan, why are you making such a big deal out of this?" "A big deal? You didn't come home." She groaned. "I was with friends." "God, you act like I owe you an explanation." And that was it. That was the moment something inside me switched off. Not from anger or sadness, just clarity. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was just a stranger with a ring. She no longer cared about the night. I knew it long before I found the texts, long before the evidence. Deep down, I had already known. I just hadn't been ready to accept it. But when I finally picked up her phone that morning, buzzing on the counter, and saw his name, I didn't need to scroll. Brandon. Not Hannah, not Julie Brandon. The man she was always with when she was supposedly out with the girls. The messages weren't even subtle. There it was in black and white. While I had been sitting at home wondering if my wife was safe, she had already left me long before I ever knew it. That was the real trail. I hoped Brandon was being charged more because he was squandering his money, and worse, he thought they were going to receive half of my house, half of my savings, and unending assistance checks. It was more about putting it in my face than actually winning. I hardly slept that morning before the final hearing, when the judge would make all the decisions. I kept repeating the same thing. Each hearing, each dispute, each time Brandon grinned. But I felt prepared rather than afraid or anxious, as if he had already won. I spotted them waiting by the entrance. Sophia in a sleek black outfit and Brandon, smug as usual, dressed as the grieving wronged man. As I entered the courthouse, I already knew what was going to happen. He smiled at me and muttered under his breath, "I hope you brought your checkbook." I didn't answer. I didn't even flinch because court was about to erase that smirk. The judge, stern and no-nonsense, wasn't in the mood for games during the session. Brandon was sweating, Sophia's lawyer was calm and ready, and Jacob. He leaned back as if he were watching a comedy show. Then the proof was shown. First, the mortgage on the property. Evidence proving I purchased it before marriage, and all payments were made from my account, not a joint one. The judge nodded. Premarital assets were not to be divided. Then came the savings account statements, proof that I had funded everything, and records showing that Sophia had stolen money, but never deposited any. Brandon's smile vanished. Then came the screenshots, Brandon's text messages. A stack of documents handed to the judge by Jacob. In them, Brandon freely admitted they were planning to steal everything, mocking the legal system as a whole. The judge's eyes clouded. He looked at Sophia and asked, "Are you aware of these messages?" Sophia froze. "I didn't know, Your Honor." But it was too late. The final verdict: no money from my funds, nothing from my house, minimal spousal support, far less than what she expected, and only for a short time. Most importantly, the judge used Brandon's messages as evidence of financial manipulation. By the end of the session, Brandon's arrogance had cost them everything. As the courtroom emptied, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Sophia looked shocked as I passed by. Brandon turned to me and raged. "This isn't over," he shouted. I grinned. "No, Brandon. This is over for you." And then I left a free man. I woke up on the morning of the last hearing with a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. Not because I knew the result, but because this was the final step. After today, no more court cases, no more Sophia and Brandon treating me like a cash machine. Whatever happened, I would walk out of that courtroom with nothing to lose. And that was enough. When I arrived, I immediately spotted them, Sophia and Brandon. He looked confident, holding a folder like it was the winning move. As I walked by, he leaned in, still grinning. "I hope you're ready to pay up, champ." I didn't stop. I didn't even acknowledge him. The judge didn't either. Sophia's lawyer started. "Your Honor, my client has suffered severe financial hardship due to this divorce. She gave up her career to support the marriage and is entitled to a fair division of assets." I almost laughed. Gave up her career? Jacob stood and said, "Your Honor, we have documented proof that the petitioner was unemployed before and during the marriage. We also have financial records showing that my client covered all expenses. Housing, utilities, mortgage, all alone." The judge reviewed the documents. "No financial contribution?" he asked. Sophia avoided eye contact. The judge turned to her lawyer. "Can you provide any documentation proving she contributed financially?" A long, uncomfortable silence. Sophia swallowed. "I helped him in other ways." The judge didn't respond. Then Jacob played the final card. "Your Honor, we also have recorded proof that the petitioner has been living with another man, Brandon Carter, since leaving the marital home." Sophia's lips parted. "I have the right to move on," she stammered. The judge nodded. "Naturally. However, if you're living with another partner who provides financial support, it affects your request for spousal maintenance." Translation. Her new boyfriend was supposed to be taking care of her. And then came Brandon's texts. The judge read them aloud. "Thank you for setting us up, Sophia. Hope you brought your checkbook, man. You're such a sucker." Sophia went pale. The judge turned to her lawyer. "Were you aware that Mr. Carter was making these remarks about your client's divorce case?" "No, Your Honor." Then the final blow. "Was this divorce filed with the intent of obtaining financial benefits for you and Mr. Carter?" Sophia didn't answer. The decision was swift. No division of assets, no large settlement, spousal support drastically reduced from the initial request. I took a deep breath. It was over. Sophia was stunned. Brandon was furious. As I stood to leave, Sophia finally snapped. "You're really just going to walk away?" she yelled. I turned back. I already did. Outside, my father was waiting. He smiled. "You did it, son." Jacob shook my hand. That was one of the most satisfying victories I've had in a long time. And I just stood there, letting it all sink in. No more manipulation, no more games, no more waking up wondering what Sophia and Brandon were scheming. They thought they had won, that they could steal from me. Instead, they lost everything. 3 days later, the aftermath hit them. Word spread. Sophia was telling everyone that the judge was biased, that I only won because I had a good lawyer, that the system was unfair. Meanwhile, Brandon was livid. He had quit his job, assuming they would be set for life. They weren't. A week later, I got a text from my sister, Claire. "Take a look at this." A screenshot popped up. A mutual acquaintance had spotted Sophia at a diner, waiting tables. The same woman who laughed when I suggested she get a job, the same woman who swore she would never lower herself. Now, she was working extra shifts just to make ends meet. Claire texted again. "Karma, baby. Got to love it."